awesome to be here with you. I'm here to talk to you about some of the divisions in our country and what we can do to heal them. My first time on a military base, I went over the fence on an Army depot in New York to protest nuclear weapons. I was a college student, it was the Cold War, and I was promptly arrested. The next time I was surrounded by members of the military was about 10 years later at a ball at the U.S. Embassy in Manila in the Philippines. I was a White House aide traveling in advance of President Bill Clinton. I danced all night with a dashing young man, a helicopter pilot from Marine One, and at the end of the evening, he kissed me. Friends, I married him. And that dance changed my life, and it changed the way I saw those fences and the different people on either side of them. I wonder how many people here have ever been on a military base? Anyone have a member of their family serving today, or is a veteran? Thank you. For the rest of you, like me back then, you might not know much about the military. And I know I had much of it wrong. I thought that the military was a rigid and conservative place. It turns out it's been a pioneer of social change in America. We've had single-payer health care for decades. It's the first place where blacks routinely were the bosses of whites. We pioneered daycare in the workplace. It leads in equal pay for equal work across genders. Another misconception, I thought the military was for people without other options. So today, that's no longer true. Do you know only 3 out of 10 young people age 18 to 24 can even qualify to enlist? Only 3 out of 10. You have to be fit, have a high school degree, score in the top half of aptitude tests. You can't have a criminal history or prior drug use. I also learned about the enormous range of jobs in the military. It turns out it's not all pilots and grunts. The military has cybersecurity, language experts, musicians. As I lived among and got to know and came to respect my new community, it was striking to me how enormous my previous ignorance had been and how entirely comfortable I had been with that. But it wasn't always this way. Do you remember the old recruiting poster? All Americans heard that and all demographics served. Did you know that in the 1950s, a majority of the graduating class from Harvard and Princeton and other top colleges would serve in the military? This means that newspaper editors and Fortune 500 CEOs, presidents like John F. Kennedy, sports stars and celebrities like Elvis and Joe DiMaggio all served or had children who served, and they served alongside the children of coal miners and truck drivers, immigrants, and that created a bond in the country. And that reminded us who we were. 75% of Congress were veterans in the 1970s, Democrats and Republicans. And those who served then said that that history of shared service created a bond that let them work across the aisle. Not anymore today. Today, fewer than 0.5% of top college graduates will go on to serve in the military. Fewer than 20% of our Congress is veterans, even after this last election, and every year that number falls. Since the all-volunteer force, we increasingly get our military from military families. The Army says that in past years, 84% of recruits have a member of their family already serving. So this is what today's poster might look like. And it wasn't what the founders had in mind, because sharing service together was supposed to bind us to our country. This worried me, particularly after 9/11, when I knew my life had changed forever, and I realized that so many of my friends from my previous life, folks in newsrooms and government offices and think tanks, people who made decisions and shaped opinions, well, they didn't know the doers or what they do. So how wise can we as a nation be in steering them and our country? That really hit me where I lived. And speaking of where I lived, that brings me to my third misconception. I thought military people lived on military bases, but that's also changed. So here's my trajectory. At one stage, I moved my family 9 times in 15 years to 3 continents, 4 countries, 5 states. My 10th grader went to 10 different schools. And a lot of that was very cool. but it was also stressful. If you've ever moved your family, you know you have to find schools, a house you can afford in that district. You need doctors, you need a job, maybe daycare, you need friends. You'll laugh, but when I married my Marine Corps husband, I didn't really understand that my life was going to change. We had met at work. It was the decade of peace, the 90s. And that all came home to me. I learned what orders mean that first year of marriage. I found out I was pregnant. Yay. Shortly thereafter, my husband got orders to Okinawa. Yikes. And very quickly, my daughter was born. The doctors told us that baby Sophie had a hole in her heart that was life-threatening. And so in a fog, there we were, shuffling to doctors for diagnosis and treatment. At the same time, we were packing up and selling our apartment and getting ready to move. So here Sophie is at 2 months old. We came up here to Boston. She had open heart surgery. A couple days later, Greg reported for duty in Okinawa. And about a month later, when she was strong enough to travel, we moved and settled among neighbors whose language I didn't speak. So there I was, a new mother with a sick infant in a strange country, far from family and friends, having lost the career that I loved and that I'd worked so hard to achieve. I felt like I had lost everything that made me valuable in the eyes of the world, and everything that had made me valuable to myself as well. And in many ways, that was my own boot camp. I got torn down, and I had to build myself back up again. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Military families do learn resilience, and I see that in my children. I see that in my son, Charlie. After our 6th move, I looked up and noticed that Charlie was missing while I was unpacking, and I was very scared. And I ran outside and ran around the block and found that he had been going from house to house, knocking on the door saying, "Hi, my name's Charlie. We're new. Are there any children in this house?" And he's very outgoing to this day. So we are volunteers for this lifestyle. People remind us of that sometimes, and it's true. And it would occur to me occasionally, it occurred to me most, I think, in my husband's second combat tour to Iraq. That was a particularly dangerous mission, and it was a particularly dangerous time. And I reflected on the fact that this husband that I loved so much, this father that my children really needed, might not come home, or he might come home different. And yet we were choosing, we were volunteers to do this, and we don't have to. So why? Well, when you're a member of a military family, you learn to do something very hard and not of your own choosing for a cause that's determined by the mechanisms of the country and the democracy that you love. You really buy into it. There is a joy in treating the person next to you as more important than you are and having them treat you the same. What makes them important is not their wealth or their SAT scores, or that they share your religion or your race or your political views, because in the military, none of that actually matters. What matters is that they have sworn to protect and defend, to bear true faith and allegiance to the United States Constitution, not the flag, but the Constitution, no matter the personal cost, and that we're all in it together. And when you're in something together, you feel that everything is possible. So we do it because it's awesome. But it's also hard, and we need solid solutions. I needed solid solutions so we could strengthen our families and retain them so they can do the work we need them to do. So about 9 years ago, a group of other women and I got together and created an organization we called Blue Star Families. We named it for the, thank you. We named it for the Blue Star flag, which Congress commissioned for families to fly to denote that they have a member serving in a time of war. Our mission is to tell the story of the currently serving military and to create connections for them in the communities where they live, to foster networks of fellowship and practical support. We field an annual survey, and we find out that although military people today live in almost every zip code in America, they don't feel they belong in those communities because they're moving so often and their mission is so different than their neighbors. And compounding this isolation is crisis levels, unemployment and underemployment, more than 20% for military spouses when the national average is 3.9%, Those who do work, even though they're more educated and credentialed than their civilian counterparts, they make less than $20,000 a year. Guess what median military pay is? It's $45,000 a year. That means a lot of these families are struggling. Blue Star Families has a way to solve this problem. But as we worked in our communities, we asked, why are these problems coming to a head today? And we realized that the underlying structure of how we run our military has fundamentally changed. Once upon a time, America created a standing military for the Cold War. We had never had one before. And for that military, young men served for 2 to 3 years on bases, and then they went on with their lives. Do you know how many were married then? It was 10%. And that's how it was for most of the 20th century. Even through Vietnam, and even through the creation of the all-volunteer force, maybe 25% were married. And for those folks, life was fairly stable. Families lived on base. Every day, the service members were trained together. They would socialize at clubs and coffees. Few mothers worked outside the home. Until finally the Cold War ended. We took a peace dividend. We closed down bases. We moved military families out into the community. And meanwhile, in larger society, families started needing 2 incomes to meet their goals, both because they needed to and because they wanted to. Well, just as suddenly, that period of peace ended, and the long war started with 9/11, and it wasn't just Iraq and Afghanistan, but complex missions proliferated around the globe as instability and bad actions reigned. And that complexity required people to serve for longer time. So now, today, our military serves on average 8 to 11 years. After an initial tour of duty, 80% of our military is married. 20% of them are women. Most of them have children. They are living in our communities, and we don't know they're there. And they are young. They're millennials, and they're Generation Z, and they have the expectations and the desires for life that those people have. These are the most deployed and most expeditionary military ever in the history of the world. 200,000 people deploy to 177 countries every day away from their families. And what are they doing? They're doing cyber defense. They do disaster relief. They help other countries train and shore up their borders so we don't have refugee crises around the world. They counter aggression, and so much more. They make our lives possible, but that's not visible to us right now. So this is the problem that we seek to solve. Blue Star Family seeks to recreate the predictability, stability, and fellowship that military families used to find on base, but find them out here in the communities where they live, with you, with reflecting the modern military families that we have today. We want to take down those invisible fences that are preventing you from knowing and engaging with your neighbors. We can do this, but we need your help. Blue Star Families has chapters and neighborhoods around the country and overseas. We have helped tens of thousands of civilian neighbors connect with the military families in their towns and globally. They've been invaluable connections as mentors, employers, volunteers, and friends. They do things like get together in groups and build bikes and give them to military kids who are near in their town and meet their parents. Or they come up with their own ideas. Chess master David Bennett in Virginia said, I'd like to teach chess to military kids, and he created a really popular club that we run through our chapter there. There's so many ways to do something. You may ask, why should I, though? And there's a couple reasons. One of them has to do with kindness, because we're working hard for you, and we need your help. But another reason has to do with our country and what kind of a country we want to be. We are supposed to be a self-government, and that means we pitch in to make the country what it is. And when we pitch in together, we know each other. And those bonds that people get through military service, well, we don't need and can't have everyone serve. But if you stand together with military families, we can create those connections again. So my request to you, on behalf of America's Blue Star Families, and in the words of the great American sage, Mr. Rogers, won't you be our neighbor?